Meeting recording has started.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. And my name is Derek Furstenworth. I'm the chair of the Gulf Coast chapter of the Air and Waste Management Association. Today's webinar is our annual joint summer meeting between the Air and Waste Management Association Gulf Coast chapter and the Texas Association of Environmental Professionals. On behalf of AWMA, Gulf Coast, and TAEP, I want to extend a big welcome and thank you to each one of you for attending. It's a great crowd today, and I'm glad that you're able to make it. The summer joint meeting is always well attended, and today's no exception, even though we're dealing with new technologies and a new format and just a new general everything going on with us these days with the pandemic. So this meeting is always winds up being kind of a general overview of the current state of environmental policies in Texas and the U.S. Today is no exception. We are going to follow that tradition and also address how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting all of us. We have two excellent guests with us today, Dr. Latrice Babin, the director of the Harris County Pollution Control Services Department, and Jeff Saitas, the former executive director of the TCEQ. Our topic today is normalization of the abnormal, looking at the pandemic, the economy, and the regulatory environment in Texas. Jeff and Latrice will each share with us their perspectives and the perspectives of their organizations and those they represent on how the pandemic has affected us all with respect to the environment and the economy. You'll hear how things have been impacted in some areas, and then you'll hear how in other areas it's almost entirely unaffected by a phenomenon as massive as a global pandemic. You'll hear about approaches to work and program implementation that have had to change for us to keep functioning through this, and which of these changes may be here to stay afterwards. And then we'll also take a look ahead at how the pandemic might impact the future of environmental regulation at the state and county level. The format will be two presentations. Jeff is going to present first, and then Dr. Babin, and then we'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. If you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat room, which is at the right side of your screen, and we will keep track of them as we go. Depending on the number of questions, we may not get them all during the meeting, and we reserve the right to sort of combine, edit, select, or otherwise subvert your questions. But we will try to get to as many of them as we can. And I believe that our speakers have said that they're willing to answer some offline after the fact. So don't let that stop you. Before we get to introducing the speakers, I want to make a couple of announcements on behalf of AWMA. And then I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Dr. Kathleen Garland of TAEP for a few remarks. So the AWMA Gulf Coast chapter announcements are just to let you all know that we're going virtual for the remainder of the year. We do have a super exciting speaker series lined up. Our August speaker is going to be from the TCEQ's Air Permits Division. And please stay tuned for our Fall All-Star Series in the third and fourth quarters this year. We've got LNG, we've got air topics, we've got other general topics, and we want to keep every one of you engaged, keep the introvert riveted. So please tune in for those, look out for the announcements, and join us for our ongoing series of focused fall luncheons. So now let me introduce Dr. Kathleen Garland of the Texas Association of Environmental Professionals. Kathy.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yep. Yep.
All right. I'm here today in lieu of Jim Doberstein, our president. I'm actually the secretary of the board, and TAEP members to the event. We're really glad you could join us. Really appreciate you coming on board for these webinars. One thing I did want to mention is if you've been with us the last couple of months. We've had our webinars and we did not charge for them, but because this is such a big meeting and an important cooperative effort with AWMA, we did decide to charge. Your dollars go towards primarily supporting our scholarships for both organizations. So that's where your money is going, because we aren't feeding you lunch anymore and paying those sorts of bills. This is a great opportunity for us to put some more dollars into the scholarship kitty, and we really appreciate those of you who registered and paid that fee up front. So thank you so very much. We will be having online webinars for the rest of the year, as far as we know, as well. And we don't have our August speaker chosen yet, but we'll be getting our lineup put back in shape now that we realize we're going to have to be doing remote pretty much for the rest of the season. So look for those on our website. We really appreciate y'all being here. And I'll get out of the way and let our speakers take over. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kathleen. And yeah, I want to underline something that Kathleen said. We do really appreciate all the participation here. This is also a primary fundraiser for Air and Waste Management Association's scholarship fund as well. So you're helping two organizations that are helping folks be educated in the environmental sciences or environmental engineering. So. Thanks very much for your participation. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. First, first, Dr. Latrice Babin is the director of the Harris County Pollution Control Services Department, which serves Harris County. I'm sure you all know we're the third most populous county in the United States. Dr. Babin's been with Harris County for 24 years in many positions, starting as a field investigator, lab chemist, permit specialist. She worked her way up through the ranks. During that time, she began to specialize in toxicology, environmental toxicology. She's been an expert witness in toxicology. She's been the primary toxicologist for Harris County. She has been a deputy director prior to her appointment as the director of the Pollution Control Services Department. Dr. Babin graduated from Texas Southern University with the degrees in biology and chemistry and a doctorate in environmental toxicology. Dr. Babin is a board member of TAEP as well. And she's also a foodie that likes to try different foods. When she's on vacation, she goes to local eateries to better understand the food scene, and then goes home and brags about all the new gems that she's found. Jeff Saitas has been a partner at the firm Saitas & Seals since 2002, where he assists clients with regulatory permitting and enforcement matters before the state and federal regulatory agencies, also Texas legislature. Before that, Jeff was with the TCEQ and predecessor agencies from 1989 to 2002. He came up through the air side of the agency, where he led the NSR division, then the Office of Air Quality, before becoming executive director from 1998 to 2002. During his tenure as executive director, Jeff helped steer the agency through myriad new programs resulting from the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. Jeff has a degree in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech and an MS in electrical engineering from the University of Texas. And in yet another sign of the changing world we live in, Jeff shared with us that his daughter is a world-class game streamer. She just won the ESPN Women of the Arena tourney, which is an online Call of Duty game tournament. It was last week. One of her teammates was U.S. women's national soccer team and OL Reign midfielder Allie Long. So while Jeff is renowned in this group and among many for the HGB ozone SIP, we may know him more soon as G2 Athena's dad. So before Jeff gets started, let me remind you that you can present questions for the speakers by asking a question in the chat function right over there. And we will ask those after both presentations have been completed, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So without further ado, Jeff, the show is yours.
Thank you very much, Derek. Let me follow the instructions that they are given, and hopefully I do them correctly. At this point, I'm hopeful that everybody sees my screen. If not, someone please tell me because I'm about to begin. There are three things I'd like to cover with the group today. The first one is, obviously there's been turmoil all around the world, and I'm going to focus on really one aspect of environmental regulation in the state, and that's enforcement discretion and how that has popped front and center. And then the second subject matter I wanted to share with the group is the TCEQ went through a rather extensive effort to develop a reopening plan, and it's a 41-page plus appendices document. But I lifted out some of those things that you may find interesting, so I want to share that with you. And then lastly, the economic impact clearly has been a huge issue for the state and its budgeting. And I want to share with you some of the developments and where that is likely to go as well. So first, let's begin with enforcement discretion. Clearly anybody that's worked with or for somebody regulated in the state of Texas and elsewhere knows that there's economic stress and that companies are struggling to balance the environmental requirements with health and safety issues. Because of that, the TCEQ has allowed, in certain cases, the use of case-by-case enforcement discretion. Now, the first one that the agency considered was in March from a company called Westlake Chemicals. Now, since that time, through to July, this past July 7th, the agency has received 189 different enforcement discretion requests, and those ranged really the full spectrum of issues. One company asked for authorization to construct a new facility without first obtaining an air permit. Many others have asked for enforcement discretion on limiting how much fugitive emission monitoring is being done. Like every other entity, these regulated entities have instituted procedures and policies to minimize the number of people on their sites. I mean, clearly the skill set in operating these complex and in some cases higher risk jobs, they need to keep those people healthy. And one way to do that is to limit their interactions with other entities and individuals that come on site. Some of the larger facilities, as many of you know, may have 10, 20, 30, or 40 fugitive emission contractors on their site at any one time. So there have been requests to limit how much fugitive monitoring can be done to limit the number of people coming on those sites. Of course, there's been a lot of criticism of the agency on allowing enforcement discretion, so much so that on April 6th, the chairman of the agency, John Neerman, wrote an open letter. And I lifted out a couple of the sections here that I thought were useful. And he essentially, the chairman, offers his support for the decision made by the executive director that it may be inappropriate to pursue enforcement of violations that are unavoidable due to the pandemic. And he further went to say in his letter that it's not a suspension of the rules. And as such, sometimes the governor will issue an order during a hurricane where they may actually suspend certain rules, but that's not the case in this instance. And it's certainly not an exemption from the agency rule, the chairman said, as some people who were uncomfortable with it characterized it. Further in the letter, the chairman pointed to some support for the approach. There was a September 2019 letter to Governor Abbott from Public Citizen, and in that letter, they suggested that they believe that exercise of enforcement in discretion and not environmental rule suspension is the appropriate action to provide companies with the flexibility they need to respond to disasters. In addition to case-by-case enforcement discretion, the executive director has extended deadlines, as many of you have known. Sometimes it's hard to get, people to sign documents and submit them timely, so they've been willing to extend deadlines. Certainly, they're continuing the process to review and approve enforcement discretion requests, and the expectation is that will continue to happen so long as we are faced with this pandemic. I put a link here for those of you that are interested. You can actually click that link and see the documentation requesting enforcement discretion and the email exchanges for each one of those 189 for your interest. Moving into the second topic, the Commission held a work session to discuss and present their return to office plan on May 28th. The basis for that started with a governor's report to Open Texas that was issued on April 27th and then subsequently amended on May 18th. Now clearly, the governor wanted the state agencies to continue to function in their roles, and so that order does say that local restrictions issued in response to the pandemic, they don't apply to the conduct of state business. TCEQ is following in that model by phasing in their operations as well. For those of you who've been tracking this, the agency did in fact return to the office in a limited capacity on June 1st. They will allow up to 25% of their staff, that's a cap, to return to the office. We all working for many of us, including us today, is likely to continue for quite some time. And that the agency's offices are close to the public. If you want to, you couldn't even go to the central offices to look for a record, for example. The TCEQ, like we've all experienced, will continue to assist the public through virtual methods, including email and telephone. I thought it was interesting on the extent to which they are really the requirements they're putting in front of their employees. They first have to require complete training. If they were going to return to the office, they have to do an initial pre-return to the office questionnaire. They also have to acknowledge daily that they've conducted a self-screening for symptoms of COVID-19. And then returning employees will have to certify that they have read and understand the return to the office plan, which I thought was kind of interesting. Certainly a regulatory agency is useful from certifications from the regulated community that here's the one that they ask every employee to certify in terms of responding and returning to the office. I would note in this case, there's not under penalty of perjury that you normally would see with a deviation report, for example. As I mentioned, the staff are limited, the divisions are limited to a 25% office capacity. It's a cap, it's not a goal. The agency determines which staff should return with a focus on essential functions and services, and those employees who can help with any gaps that may have been created by the inability for the whole agency to return to the office. Division management considers the whole range of staggered work shifts, from rotating schedules, split schedules, alternating weeks, splitting A&P schedules. They even have a link to some innovative studies that Israeli research scientists, where individuals may work 4 days, consecutive 10-hour days in the office, and then take the next 10 days out of the office. So they're looking at the full range of plans to get the agency back to normal. For those who deal with the field investigators, travel and field work is considered essential. Field employees have been requested to ask any facility that they enter into whether there are mitigation strategies that they have to pay attention to, or whether there's additional PPE that they may be required to wear. And if the staff does in fact show up, they have been asked to carry not only their agency issued ID, but a copy of an employee travel letter. As I mentioned earlier, each division has assessed its operation to identify any gaps, and then they have a plan for those gaps as to how they're going to address them and which people are going to address them. And of course, those individuals have been targeted to return to the office first. The last subject I wanted to touch on is the state fiscal impacts associated with this. It's not unusual in trying times for the leadership of the state, and that would be the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House, to give some directions to all of the organizations in state government. I took out a couple of the sentences in here so that you could see what they're relaying to the heads of these of state agencies and universities. They say it will take months to know the true extent of the economic ramifications. And they instructed the agencies to be prepared for the economic shock that they have to take action today in order to continue to provide essential services. One of the things they had asked for is they focused on the current biennium. For those of you that don't know state budgeting processes, the legislature comes to Austin once every 2 years for a 140-day session. And that session begins in January and ends in May. And when they're there, they adopt a budget. And that budget covers a 2-year period of time, a biennium. And that biennium begins on the September 1st and follows for the next 2 years, ending on August 31st. So the current biennium will continue until August 31st of next year, I believe, 20 to 21. So during that, even though the budget has been passed and the budget has been approved, the leadership has asked the agencies to offset current year revenue loss. And they have suggested some areas that the agency should look at. Now, many of these we all know are the standard ones that organizations do look to at tight times: capital expenditures, travel expenditures, administrative expenses. But I wanted to highlight the one that they are asking all state agencies and universities to keep unfilled any open positions that are not essential. So, if you project that forward, I think there's some expectations that some of those positions in the near future may be lost. They've asked each state agency and institution of higher learning to submit a plan identifying the savings that will reduce their general revenue appropriations by 5%. So that's a 5% reduction from a budget that they have right now. That's not a budget for the next biennium. So there's a requirement to do that. And I've tried to find, that plan was supposed to be submitted by last June 15th, and I wasn't able to find it in time to make this presentation to see what's in it. But it does set the stage. So the agencies will all go into the next legislative session with a 5% reduction. And if the way it works in the future is the way it worked in the past, the first thing the legislature will do is say, we're going to start with the budget that you just had, and that budget will be not the one we approved, but the one you have now after the reductions. So going forward, I think there'll be continued stress on TCEQ and other state agencies with reduced funding and reduced budgets. Now, to put that in perspective for those of us who've been around for quite some time, if you look over the past 20 years or so, the state has grown in population by roughly 50% from, let's say, a little under 20 million in the late 90s to around 30 million now. Well, during that time, TCEQ's personnel, the total FTE, has gone from 3,200 down to around 2,850, and likely to be reduced more during this crisis. So it's really challenging for the state to meet all of the requirements that are put in front of them with the increased populations, but they have done some extraordinary things with electronic communications and regulations that help going forward. The last thing I will say that it's really had to do with a conversation I had yesterday with one of the Region 6 directors. It's, clearly they're going through the same thing there. They're closed. They do allow supervisors to go in once a week on Fridays. What's interesting to me, and it was kind of a little bit of a chuckle, is that here you have division directors going in, and of course EPA is very used to having paper. And each one of the 5 states in Region 6, they get a copy of every, for example, NPDES permit that is issued by the state. Now, Texas issues 3,000 of those things. So there's a lot of paper. So these division directors show up at the office and they are doing administrative work. They are opening the mail. They're taking pictures of the front pages and sending it to their staff. They are, to kind of keep things going, they may have to do certified mailing themselves because staff isn't allowed to go there. So it really is truly a unique and trying time. And there are entities that are even government trying to do some changes to make things more efficient. The one thing I do hope this pandemic does do as a positive going forward, there still are a number of functions in government where you have to have paper. For example, with respect to that Title V deviation enforcement discretions, they have to do discretion on, getting original signatures. Now, when you stand and think about it, many of us file our IRS tax returns electronically. And if you can file an IRS tax return electronically, you certainly should be able to send in all kinds of reporting, all kinds of, Data 5 certifications of compliance. All of those should be, somehow we should figure out a way to do that electronically without having companies, create an original document and FedEx it to every other manager at home to get them to sign it in order to get an original signature to the agency. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Babin for the wonderful things she's going to say. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Jeff. So, I'm sorry, can you? Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay. Okay, so Harris County Pollution Control actually began its start as the regulatory entity in 1953 as a result of Commissioner's Court order to work on air quality and water quality issues. This was actually even before the establishment of the US EPA. And so at that time, we were the first joint air and water pollution section in the country. We utilized what was then the England Common Law Nuisance Statute and the 1945 Sanitation Law with the focus on the health, comfort, and well-being of the citizens. It really still goes well with our mission statement now, which is to ensure clean air and water for the citizens of Harris County, consistent with the protection of public health, enjoyment of property, and the protection of plant, animal, and marine life. The first director of pollution control was Dr. Walter Caboto, and staff utilized these rules and recommended to entities engineering controls, abatement plans to help improve visibility, to reduce haze and the buildup of the bayous in the ship channel. And the focus was not really on the volume of the chemicals, but on whether the material caused an undue discomfort to the residents. Currently, pollution control has 8 different sections: the administrative section, communications section, which is newly added to the department in a robust effort to add transparency and communication, the compliance services section, permits and technical services, emergency response, which goes out to respond to any emergency situation that may occur, investigative field services, which conducts our routine inspections. The laboratory services is our own laboratory that is on property that runs all of the analysis of the samples that we collect. And the wastewater and water, which is also inclusive of stormwater. So Harris County Pollution Control has enforcement authority. Even though we do not issue permits, we enforce state and some federal regulations that have to do with the allowance of a statutory authority from the TCEQ and, well, from the state legislature. We have the authority to enforce Chapter 361 from the Health and Safety Code for solid waste disposal, Chapter 382 from the Health and Safety Code for the Clean Water Act, Chapter 26, the Texas Water Code, Chapter 7 of the Water Code, and then the subsection 351 provides us the authority for litigation when needed. As with all entities that are experiencing COVID, we have had to implement some social distancing. Now, for the most part, you won't see any real difference in our activities because it's really kind of business as usual, but there are some engaged modifications. Complaints are still being dispatched to our investigators, but the complaints are being dispatched and they are leaving from their homes to go out to start those investigations instead of leaving from our office building. So you won't see as many vehicles in our parking lot if you pass through there as you normally would. However, we have not wavered in our regulatory activities. We do recognize that COVID is an issue and that the stay-at-home order is in effect. However, we look at those things that if we do have a violation notice that has to be issued, we do look at that as a case-by-case basis to determine whether or not it could have been COVID influenced or whether it was just an act of the maintenance or omission or something of another nature. All of our employees are required to, when they come to the building or when they're out in the field, to wear a mask at all times. And that was even before the latest mask requests, because we wanted to make sure that all of our staff were being safe. The investigators, as I indicated, the investigators start from home, and we try to, as much as possible, indicate that all paperwork should be done electronically so that it limits the amount of paperwork that we have to handle when we're out in the field. We have implemented staggered work locations. As I indicated, work from home. All staff is limited to 2 days max in the office. If they don't need to come into the office, we really prefer that they not come into the office so that it limits those interactions. We do have a laboratory on property, as I indicated, and so our laboratory has to be staffed at all times to make sure that we can handle the workflow. But our lab samples that come in are very closely coordinated so that we make sure that we have ample lab staff to handle the load, but not put too many people in the lab if not necessary. We do ask that the employees look at the newly instituted questionnaire so that they can every day assess their ability to perform their work safely. Meaning, we ask for temperature checks, we ask for parameters to be looked at as to whether they have been around someone that is positive, whether they have done any traveling over the weekend or on a vacation that may have put them in a situation where they may have been in a hot zone. We want them to make sure that they go through those so that we can, again, keep our workers safe. Harris County has a COVID task force that looks at the current level, COVID level, and determines whether there needs to be an adjustment to those activities or not. And so before we all come back into the workplace, even with modifications, if we're deciding to do more remoting, we're going to have to look for guidance from the COVID task force on how to bring workers back percentage-wise so that everybody doesn't come back at one time. And then we are looking to make sure that we are in compliance with that request. So to look at complaints and other activities, you'll see in green, the green represents the period of February to June for our complaints. And I have slides for investigations and violations compared to the same time period in 2019. This slide shows that it was a relatively even number of complaints that came in that time period. There was a slight increase in the inspections that we were able to conduct. And then there was a slight increase in the violation notices that went out. To break that down a little further, there was an anomaly that occurred in 2019 with the ITC event. So you'll see that the most complaints that we received in 2019 from February to June occurred in March. But if you look, you also will see that in June of 2020, we also had a pretty high number. The record number in this COVID time period of 2020 was in May of this year. And I believe that's basically because people are home more and they're being more observant, and people have been made more aware. And so we do rely very heavily on complaints to address some of those environmental issues in our community. And so that has been one of those influential factors. If you look at inspections, you see that in 2020, there was a very high number of inspections that occurred. And I believe that that was because of a institution of the newly implemented concrete batch plant inspection ramp up. We have always done concrete batch plant inspections, but we ramped that up a little bit. And there may have been another factor that included in the month of February. However, if you see, we have a increase in the amount of inspections in 2020 from February to June. And then again, if you look at our violations in that same time period from February of 2019 to June of 2019, compared to February of 2020 to June of 2020, you see that the most violations occurred in February of 2020. And then we have an increase basically in those numbers of violation notices that have gone out. Some of the proactive approaches that we have implemented have to do with some things that we had already planned. And so now that we are in a COVID situation, we have not ramped those down. We're still engaging in those. We're looking at concrete batch plant inspections a little differently, as I indicated. And we have also, with the newly reinstituted communications group, we have a public engagement modicum that allows us to assist the community in knowing when those concrete batch plant open comment periods are available, so that they can make comments about the impacts to their community. We were also informed that communities didn't really have a very good grasp on how to make comments to the TCEQ. So this also allows our public engagement specialists to indicate to them how they can make those comments, the address that they can send those comments to, and then give them the deadlines for those comment periods. We also began looking at Title V review, which we had not done prior to the end of 2019. And we are also increasing our emission event investigations by adding another emission event investigator. So now we have two. Previously, we only had one. So that's an increase as well. So for the financial outlook, things look a little different for pollution control, because in September of 2019, we were granted an addition to our budget of $5.9 million from the Commissioner's Court. This allowed for us to increase staff, which would allow us a 29 employee increase from 2019 to 2022. We're spreading it out a little bit. We initially started off in 2019. In September of 2019, we had 49 staff members. We're looking to grow that to 77 with the new 29, but that's a 63% increase in our staffing. This money that was awarded to us in 2019 is for us to purchase fleet for our investigators, to purchase a arsenal of monitoring equipment, from semi-stationary, handheld, and also a data management platform, so that we can put that information on a website so that community members can go and look at this information in one location and see where their community is and what the impact of air quality might be on their community. We also, with this funding, we are allowed to increase our laboratory equipment. Our laboratory equipment is being increased to include some new GC monitors. I'm sorry, not monitors, GC equipment, so that we can run things a little faster and a little better. We indicated that was a need when we saw a large amount of samples that came through during some of our other events that happened in 2019. Another thing that we have been able to do, especially with the COVID outlook is to increase our digital platform. We are looking at updates for our website. We have included some things with our communications group, such as a data analyst that can help us look at some of those things a little bit better and put more mapping and cartography on our website to allow us to see where we are doing some of our monitoring and where some monitoring might be more needed. We have an increased use of software, and we are also implementing a newsletter that I will show you an example of, an internal newsletter and an external newsletter, so that we can keep communities and other interested parties involved and understand where we are in our department. As of July 8th, there was a new online complaint form that was added to our website. So that gives us a little more of a digital edge. This is an example of our internal newsletter. So this is really helpful during this COVID period because we have new staff members that have come into our department, and with us not being in one location, we don't get a chance to see each other face to face very much. So we get a chance to highlight some of the new sections that are doing some new things. We get a chance to highlight the employee of the month, which is really good. And we also get a chance to give an introduction to the new staff that have come aboard that we are not able to see face to face very often with COVID. The next slide shows you our external newsletter, which is a quarterly newsletter, and you are able to sign up to receive this newsletter on our website. If you are not receiving this, then again, communications can send that out to your group, to your community group or organization, so that you can be well informed with what we are doing, become a little more informed on our sections and some of those other things that we are putting on our social media. We also have included social media. We have a Twitter page, we have a Facebook page, and we also have a Facebook page that we are now engaging in that we did not previously have. Survey 123 is one of the ways that we are implementing a platform of where our monitoring is going. During the immediate implementation of an emergency event, we're starting our monitoring. Our emergency responders are going out to start the monitoring. They utilize tablets or their phones with the software of Survey 123, which is a part of ESRI, and they populate the map where they are currently receiving indications of detections. This can be also done with our water, if there is a water discharge that we're tracking. But so far, we've really only used it with air monitoring. You may have seen some of this on our website when ITC happened, and there have been a couple of other events that happened, and we also included this on our webpage. We plan to implement this and utilize this to keep the community informed of where our monitoring is occurring so that they can see what those levels might be in their area. I indicated that we have a new complaint form that has been uploaded to our website as of July 8th. But for the usage of technology during this time period, we're using a lot of Zoom conferences so that we can stay in touch with each other. It allows us to have meetings with other entities, and we're also utilizing Microsoft Teams for the same purpose. This brings me to the end of my presentation. You can see my contact information here. Also, you see our social media information for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please join us on any of these platforms to learn more about our activities. And that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation.
All right, excellent. Dr. Babin, Mr. Saitas, thank you so much both for the presentations. A lot of really good information there. We've got a few questions in the queue. Attendees, please go ahead and bring some more. And while I'm waiting for some additional questions in the queue, let me start out with a question of my own that leads into an attendee question. So why would y'all say that there's such a difference in policy between the county and state programs in terms of electronic communications? It looks like there's a lot more electronic tools that are approvable at the county level, whereas we were talking about the need to deal with paper at the state levels. Is that a function of the agency or the where the program authority is, or something else? And then do you see action during the next legislative session to address that at whatever level? I'd like to hear each of your thoughts.
I'll start off. That has been a new implementation as a request of community members wanting to know more about what we are doing and asking for more transparency. So again, with the implementation of a new budget from 2019, we were allowed some additional funds that we could develop those things out. So again, COVID has been very influential in bringing things like the usage of Microsoft Teams more to the surface and bringing things like the Zoom conferencing. So prior to COVID, that was not something that we did on a regular basis. We had just started looking into using Teams, Microsoft Teams, but Zoom had not been something that we had previously explored.
And Derek, let me just give a little perspective on the state side. I mean, clearly there's an enormous amount of electronic activity that occurs. I mean, for those that deal with air permitting know that on simple permitting matters, you could go through steers and get an immediate response. And even now, the signature process for approval of a permit, that's all done electronically. I mean, they do mail out a copy, but you get the PDF of the signed document. It's all done electronically. But there's still room for improvement. I mean, there are some things that the rules require, original signatures on that need to change. And there's no reason why they shouldn't change, I don't think. I'll also refer back to that conversation I had yesterday with one of the directors at Regis 6th, and the instruction to his staff, he said, tell me if it's not in the Clean Water Act, then why are we doing it? And so there's some pressure to try and make things simpler and not have to move around an enormous amount of paper. And I think that'll likely be one of the positive impacts of going through this trying time.
All right, excellent. Thank you both. Let's see, the next one that I have is a question for Mr. Saitas. As a former director at TCEQ, what would be some of the first aspects of operations or administration or so forth that you would expect to see from a 5%-ish budget cut?
I will tell you, if you want to, the first thing you try desperately do is to keep your people. Okay. I would look to try to satisfy the direction with money. And there's some big dollar programs in there. For example, many of the folks on this call probably have participated or used the TAEP funding. And I think you could satisfy at least the money side of that equation by just not spending all of the grant money without cutting into the substantive aspects of the agency's functions, permitting, enforcement, those kinds of activities are, they're the backbone of a regulatory agency. But that's where I would look to first, is seeing, can we address this issue by reducing funding, for example, for TAEP grants?
All right, excellent. Thank you. Next question I have is for Dr. Babin. Has Harris County been interacting at all with regulators from surrounding counties like Galveston County Health District to develop plans or strategies for the kind of the new normal, or each county really have left to develop strategies on their own?
So we have not necessarily reached out to develop strategies because there's not really another county that does things exactly the way that we do. We do work with our partner entities in those other counties when we see the need to do so if something is at the border of our county. However, there has been an audit performed that we will learn more information about to look at some other comparator counties in jurisdictions in other areas to see what we can do to improve those plans and look at some of those things that they're doing that we might be able to institute in our department.
All right, thank you. And by the way, y'all, I'm pausing a little bit in between questions. Some of it's just to let me scan the question queue, and if either of you see, so some of these are for both of you, and some of these are directed at a person. But if either of you has a relevant comment to the one that I just asked, please don't hesitate. Let's see. The next one that I had was. I didn't think I would pause this quickly. Public notice, is there, that's been interesting trying to get public notice done. And I've seen some interesting ways of trying to get public notices done. You can, newspaper publication, obviously that's been a big part of it, but also there's a requirement to post a public notice in a public place like a library. And there's been times when there's been no libraries open. So people have had to have innovative ways of doing that. Like I've seen have the libraries post a public notice on their webpage since nobody could actually get into the library. But what's the status as far as either of you know about more online public notice methods rather than sort of the paper-based? It sounds like a state question, probably.
Right. Well, I'm sure the county has theirs as well, but clearly that's right. I mean, the challenge with permits were still being reviewed. They were required to be noticed. The notices, the rules say in a public location, the application will be viewed. And so the agencies have struggled with that, and they've tried to be very, find some flexibility in the process. We all know that, libraries are closed. There's been some entities that have made multiple copies, and some libraries would allow folks to check out the application. So they would put the applications there and satisfy it through a checkout process. Other entities would work with the agency and had a website to list a link to review the application. In addition to that, the TCEQ has a web page where you could see all of the applications that are out to public notice at one time. I mean, there's some risk there, right? Because it's not strictly following the black and white letter of the rules, but nonetheless, the process has to go on. And I think they're doing a reasonable and credible path of trying to find a balance of properly notifying the public and still allowing the system to run.
I would say that I would like to see more electronic public notices. There's a way that the facilities could put that on their websites, even if communities know that something's going on. They're not quite sure what. If they could go to the facility's website, that would be great. Or if they would be able to easily find that at their library, on the library's website. However that has to happen. If there's an easier way that more information could be given to the communities on public notice, I would really love to see that.
All right, great, thank y'all. And here's a good follow-up question that just came in. How are y'all handling both Jeff, I know you're not handling it personally. How are the agencies handling public meetings and public hearings? I know that's difficult these days.
Well, I mean, if you listen to it, but those of you that listen to agenda meetings, right? I mean, they've done an extraordinary effort. I've listened to two here recently. One was the commission agenda meeting just this past week, and they go fairly smoothly. Every once in a while, somebody who signs up to speak has a problem technically, and they have to struggle with that. No surprise there. And then the other one I listened to last week was an actual contested case hearing process. And I have to tip my hat to the SOA judges, because that's a legal proceeding, right? And you've got to follow rules of procedure. You've got to allow people to state their case for why they should be a party in a particular matter. But they're able to make them work, and they're functional. So hopefully they'll get more fluid in the future. But from what I've seen so far, they've done a tremendous job.
All right, excellent. Any thoughts at from the county on that one?
Only to say that I'm very happy to see that that has been moved forward in that direction so that they can proceed.
All right, great, thank you. Let's see. So when this is a question for you, Dr. Babin. When somebody notices a problem, what's the easiest way for them to access the online complaint form?
I'll go back to my slides if I can do that easily to provide the URL, but you can go to Google and put in Harris County Pollution Control Services. It can take you to our website where you can go. There is something on our website that indicates the online complaint form, and you can just, at that point, put that on. We're looking to eventually put that into an app that can be used on your phone so that you can, while you're out. However, if you are out and about and you see something, you can go to your browser on your cell phone and you can use your phone and drop the point on your phone where the potential issue is, and it'll give an address and you can upload it. You do not have to include your name if you don't want to. Including your name allows us to get back in contact with you to give you a status update of our investigation. Otherwise, you would have to notate the number that it gives you and then make reference of the address and the date that you made that complaint, and we can go back and search that for you and give you the information at a later date if you call.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Oh, there we go. There's the various different ways to get in touch.
Is that what you wanted, Dr. Babin?
I apologize. Our website address is not on there. It's our social media information. However, I believe it is also on our social media page. You can find that information. But as I indicated, if you go to Google, you can very much so Google that for pollution control services. It'll take you to our website and you'll see an indication of a form availability.
I'll post it in the chat box when I find it.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question is for Jeff. Is there an issue with private entities hosting electronic versions of permit application to satisfy public notice?
I have heard of one instance that it was a commercial hazardous waste entity that was a little worried about putting information where anyone in the world could see how the facility runs. It was more of a homeland security risk to them that they were worried about. The other side of that is if it's in the public forum, then if an entity wants to get it, they can get it, right? I mean, they can either get it electronically, they can get it through an open records request, they can get the information. But there are entities out there that are worried about when you post it online, it's not like just the local individuals are going to be reviewing it. It's there for anyone in the world to pull it up.
All right, thank you. So continuing on some of the discussion about sort of public notice and public interaction, which it makes sense. What have you all seen in terms of notices for populations with limited English proficiency? How's that working?
Well, from my perspective, that's still a requirement in the rules. For example, on air permitting, for those of you who deal with air permitting, is still a requirement, and the applicant in working with the agency is still required to do so. So they're finding ways to make that work.
I'm still seeing notices come in that are being posted in the newspaper of where they can find the information, and they are still posting them in English as well as in Spanish, the most prevalent language.
Right, okay. Let's see, Dr. Babin, the increase and budget that you've referred to a couple of times from the Commissioner's Court. Does that directly lead to more sampling and investigations within Harris County? You mentioned additional staff. Is there also specific? Is that directed to increase sampling or investigations?
Yes, it will increase our staffing for investigators. It will also help us with, it increased our staff for compliance, the compliance section, so that we can go through those violations and use those review processes to determine whether or not there is more need for meetings to be held with facilities, or if there's anything that we need to do to even more so move in enforcement.
Thank you. And then, see, I got one more, and let's have this. This seems like a good one to end on. So let's have each of you address. And Dr. Babin, you can go first, and Jeff, you can go second. What do you see as the long-term changes? You kind of been talking about this, but just summarize. What do you see as the long-term changes that will come out of this pandemic?
So as I indicated, we're moving towards more of a transparency of information. And so in developing our website, we really want to make sure that our citizens can look at our website and find more information. Again, with the public engagement, putting that information so that the citizens know how to respond to the issues that they see, send that to us and let us do more of those investigations. If they would like to make comment, we want to educate them on how to make those comments, just to be more open to our community about the level of participation that they can be involved in the regulation of pollution abatement in their communities. And we're also moving towards more monitoring, and we want the communities to be engaged in the placement of monitors. If they're interested in knowing where those monitors should be of more benefit to them, give us that information and let us know that, engaging in more mobile monitoring with our mobile van that we're purchasing to move forward to see what the ambient air quality is in our community, as well as stationary or semi-stationary monitors.
Right, great, thank you.
When I look at this issue and when I visit with people, I think it's the changes that we are taking up individually. You know, I was old school. It wasn't work unless you went to the office. I mean, you know, I would never want to work at home. I would have a long list of stuff that I wanted to do at the house, and if I ever stayed home, I never got my work done. But that's changed. I found a way to be comfortable doing work at home, and I think a lot of people have. And so I think you're going to see a pretty significant increase in people not going into the office and doing the work from home, because they find, in many cases, finding them more efficient. Now, I'd also add to that I would expect, you know, with all the economic pressures, I would expect, you know, some organizations to start downsizing their expensive office space. And that may even include the state. I mean, they own all these buildings, some of them they lease, but they may turn around and say, you know, we can function with, you know, 25% of our population are state employees at home. So guess what? We're going to reduce our office space by 25%. So I think long term that people are going to, you know, get comfortable with some aspects of this pandemic. I will tell you, you know, who would have thought that the big risks would have been to my life would be going to the grocery store and getting a haircut. I mean, honestly, you know, who would have thought that? But that's where we are. And so, you know, it's pretty nice when you don't have to do a lot of the stuff and actually go out and do it. But so that, to me, that's what I think. There's a cultural change. It's not going to be just in the environmental field. It's going to be across everything where people get comfortable shopping on Amazon a lot more than going to the store. I've seen that a lot in our household. We get boxes by the galore now, front at the mailbox and in the front step. And so I expect those changes in some measure to stay even when we get past this pandemic.
Excellent. Thank you both for those closing responses. And I just want to say thanks again many times over to our speakers, Dr. Babin, Mr. Saitas, tremendous presentations. I appreciate your perspectives on how the pandemic has been affecting us all, and how we've also just continued along doing the things that we need to do. It's amazing what we're able to continue to function in the face of difficult challenges like this. So on behalf of the membership of Air and Waste Management Association and TAEP, thank you so much. This is where I would call for a big round of applause, but that didn't work so well with a meeting like this. I also want to thank our membership and our guests for attending the meeting, for supporting both programs, our scholarship programs, and just for supporting the organizations. We're committed to bringing information to our membership and to the public on environmental matters. I think Craig had a couple of announcements he would like to make for TAEP. Craig?
Yeah, both organizations will post the video and the slides on our websites. I think I put the link in there. For folks that are attending only by telephone, if you could email me at admin@taep.org. I'm trying to get a quality attendees list and your names don't show up. So if you could do that for me, I'd appreciate it. And as also, we'll take any feedback. I know we had a few glitches, but with folks on the technical side, but we'll take any comments that you have at admin@TAEP on how the presentation worked for you. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks very much. Once again, thank you, Dr. Babin. Thank you, Mr. Saitas, for the great presentations. Thanks everyone for attending, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.